Welcome to Post Break. My name is Chris Peterson. I'm board secretary of the Post New York Alliance, and I chair the Education and Events Committee, which produces these Post Break events. I was going to say it's a podcast, but it's kind of a hybrid podcast meeting, get together, discussion. And today's is especially exciting because it's on Zoom and in person at Goldcrest. Today's topic is documentary filmmaking in New York, the unfiltered exploration of life. And now to introduce our moderator, he founded the facility 1619 and sold it to Company 3. And he's been very busy since. He's a consultant at Goldcrest and at a software company called ProdPro, among several other projects, and is, of course, a founding board member of the PNYA. Please give a warm welcome to Pete Conlon.
As Chris said, today we're talking about documentary filmmaking in New York. I don't know if I'm even on camera. And, you know, we started the Post New York Alliance 15 years ago with a real focus on, you know, getting the tax credits right, growing New York, growing the industry, and it's been super successful. New York has become a great place to work. Our industry, we've watched it grow and grow, and it's been wonderful. But our alliance, our membership, really has focused on features and scripted stuff, and we haven't really talked about documentary filmmaking or unscripted. And if you grew up and worked in New York, as we all have here, all of us have worked on documentaries. All of us have worked on unscripted projects. It's pretty much where all of us started. And considering some of the crap that gets made series these days, it's probably some of the best projects that we've worked on. So the reason we wanted to do this was really to sort of get our membership talking about documentary filmmaking again. So I will now introduce our distinguished panel. Grace McNally is an award-winning right there's Grace award-winning documentary director and producers whose work has appeared on National Geographic, PBS, the Discovery Channel, Comedy Central, HBO, I guess on everything. Recently, she co-directed and produced the 4-part doc-series Keep, Sweet, Pray, and Obey for Netflix, and Slay the Dragon, which premiered at the Tribeca Film Festival and was distributed by Magnolia Pictures. Anything else? Give her a rousing round of applause. Shirley Williams is a producer, director, entrepreneur, I wrote this because I know you pretty well, and owner of Willie B Studios, an amazing modern production company. She's produced over 140 hours of unscripted television for major networks, produced and directed hundreds of branded docu-series for brands like Cadillac, Ikea, and Ritz. She's currently working on an incredible project that I'm working on with her called A Break in Belongings. Carla Gutierrez is an Emmy and Eddie nominated documentary filmmaker. Is that right? Her directorial debut, Frida, premiered at Sundance in 2024, where it won the prestigious John Oppenheimer Award for Best Editing. Frida is currently streaming on Prime Video and playing in theaters in Mexico. Congratulations. Nick Weston, the owner and executive director of Goldcrest Films, Goldcrest Post, and Saboteur Films. Nick's Emmy and Oscar-nominated films include Which Way is the Front Line from Here, The Life and Time of Tim Hetherington. Thank you. Restrepo, Hell on Earth, The Fall of Syria, and Rise of ISIS for National Geographic, and he's currently in production on
64 Days. I was the journalist that was embedded with the Proud Boys and ended up being the first congressional witness in the January 6th Select Committee hearings.
So you're all being recorded right now, but
yeah. And I directed a couple of hundred music videos, which was like, I don't know why they let me in, but that's sort of
Right, Ryan wrote this stuff. Ryan Price is a genius supervising sound editor and re-recorded mixer here at Goldcrest. His recent projects include The New Look and Palm Royale for Apple TV. He's previously worked on award-winning shows Damages and Filthy Rich, And many of our documentary and unscripted projects always start with Ryan sort of looking at them, consulting on them, and figuring out what we're going to do with them for sound. Let's give Ryan a big. So I think for me about documentaries, the thing that fascinates me the most, or the questions that I always want to ask filmmakers, and I think I'll start with Grace, and then obviously feel free to take the questions you want to ask everyone, is when you're thinking about your topics, or you're finding your stories, or your stories are finding you, like, how do you figure out that it's a story worth telling and like worth for you? Like, what's the, you know, you can talk about anything, like what, for the projects you've worked on, like, how does that go for you?
Well, obviously, films and especially documentary projects come together in a lot of different ways. But I think when you're trying to figure out if one is right for you, this is a couple answers to that question. The first being, I think, a filmmaker's voice and perspective comes into it, and that no matter what the topic is, no matter what the story is, like we would make two different films about the exact same people and the exact same topic. So you sort of put into it what you find interesting about it. So it becomes the thing that you want it to be in that sense. Because that's true, you can sort of pick any topic, anything, any story you want to tell, and you'll find your path through the things that you find interesting and you want to pull out of people, the things that you connect to. That being said, if you have the privilege of getting to pick, right, how do you pick? You know, I think it's, you can think of it like dating. You know, you search around, you're always listening, and then something sort of strikes you, and you don't know at first what you like about it, but that's why you go on a date to figure it out. You start to research, and you want to uncover, you know, I'm connected to these characters in this way, I see myself in them, or I'm really interested in the science or the anthropology that they're exploring. So yeah, I think it's some combination of you're always going to make the film yours, no matter what it is. And then if you have the privilege of getting to pick, you know.
And then expanding on that, like, are you ever in a situation where you're like, is this worth telling? Like, do you doubt yourself, like, or do you get deep into it and you're like, is anyone going to watch this?
Is this important enough?
Is it important enough? Yeah. Or do you just go with it?
I think if it's something you're interested in and you see the potential in it, then I think you can follow that instinct. You're probably right.
Right.
It's just a matter of uncovering that correctness and then putting it on the screen.
Right.
And not, you know, doing what you think you should do, but doing how you really feel about the thing. Why are you excited?
Yeah.
If you know why you're excited, then you put that on the screen. That makes sense. I think it's more difficult with, you know, getting people into that's once it's being viewed, right?
Right.
You make it feel important. To get people actually in the seat, like obviously it helps to have some very splashy headline. That's what headlines are, right? But that's what PR team's for, right?
Yeah. And Shirley, like, once you have the idea going, we're sort of going through the project you're working on, like, how do you start to break it into like a story, you know, outline, like, how do you really story produce it?
Working on overwhelming the subject back in 2018. I also love where I questioned if I wanted to continue story. It's about a minister who murdered one of his best friends and then went and served 23 years in prison, and he never told his wife or his 5 children why he did it. So it's sort of like this unveiling of what actually happened, his family finding out for the first time, and exploring what happens to Black children when they lose a parent, like the generational impact, economic impact, the emotional impact, all the things. So it's hella layers, right? There's all these pieces. There's the children were assigned to Clive Davis at the height of Arista, and you know they lost their record deal. See a family essentially going from heading from middle to upper class to essentially being in poverty. You have the layer of secrecy and how that is such like a longstanding problem in Black communities. You have the issue of incarceration and how Black and brown children are not only directly impacted by incarceration, but indirectly impacted in incarceration. So there's all these pieces, all these layers. And so there's the joy and the fun of the challenge of figuring out like what this story is, but it's a process, right? It's like being in it, being a part of it, and allowing it to, one, naturally unfold and reveal itself to you, and then being connected and present to what is ringing, like, it's an intuitive thing. Like, what am I drawn to? What feels like I will have an opportunity to bring my strong perspective to the story. So I think it's being with the story and being in the process of allowing the story to unveil itself. And again, I've been working on this thing for 5 years, and it requires patience and time. And then also being intuitively connected to yourself and to the subjects and to the story, and seeing what you're passionate about, what you're hearing, what's drawing you to the story. But I think that's more so, that's like a feeling thing. But in terms of process, right, it's, I was just talking to someone, I didn't get your name, but you were sharing with me about your process and your doc that you're making right now. It's the being with the footage, watching, reading the transcripts, throwing things on paper, seeing what's making sense, crafting outlines, not being afraid to try things, throw them in the trash and try something new. So, and just rinse and repeat, doing that over and over until you find something that's sticking.
Yeah, Nick, I know you're right, sort of in the middle of that with you know, one of your projects and screening tonight. Like, how do you start to break down that event or all the things, the factors around it, and shape it into something?
So we're making a film called 64 Days, which is the 64 days between the election and January 6th. There's been some films made about why 6 people were on the steps of the Capitol. I had no interest. I wanted to know why 60,000 people were there. And I wanted to know how organized this effort was that ended up, storming the Capitol. So I started making a film about division in America, and I was with, the polar extremes. I was with John Brown Gun Club and these guys in Philly called Black Guns who are massively two-way advocates, believing that all gun control is racist because look at American society, I need to protect myself. And then trying to find commonality with Oath Keepers, Proud Boys, and 3 Percenters, and seeing whether their grievances were the same. So when January 6th was, when I was sort of clambering over the barricades on January 6th with a bunch of insurrectionists, it took me 2 or 3 weeks even to calm down, and like how my body, I've been in conflicts all over the world, and that took me really 3 weeks to like actually be able to sleep again and not doom scroll. I used to play Where's with myself, like, oh, look. And so I went to multiple times. There was just no lethal force. The people did die, but it wasn't because I didn't see, one of my colleagues filmed Ashley Babbitt being shot, and I saw Roseanne Boylan die, but the police were enormously restrained on that day in comparison with it. Anyway, it took me a while to there was lots, people came to me and said, do you want to contribute or even be in these films? And I was like, no, I don't, because that's not where I went. It took me a while, it took me like 6 or 7 months to like really, there's the Dan Reed film, which she's like an ambulance chaser for like, security camera footage. It makes like Mumbai or January 6th, whatever. There's going to be another cataclysm. He's going to make another film with the security camera footage, I promise you. It's like industry. It took a while, and then except for the committee found me, and there were some excellent investigators who are my friends today, who I use as basically the backbone for the film, right? Because they did the real investigation. If you really want the truth, look at the committee investigators. These are excellent lawyers who spent 14 months, like trying to work out, how this clandestine network of political operators, militias, politicians, lawyers, sought to maintain the power of the president after the 2020 election. So it just takes a while. And then I also had a federal trial as well. Like, so I didn't want to release a film about the Proud Boys before a federal trial. So I get called for the federal trial, and I'm there for a week. And then, I'm still building, and also the FBI, an excellent group of investigators, much more compelling than journalists. If the feds ask you a question, you have to tell the truth. Journalists get lied to all the time. Like, so, you start to build this, if you're really trying to find what the truth was about the situation, you need to pause and wait, because you don't have the investigative capacity of these people. I managed to get people to talk to me that I thought was bizarre, like Clayton Mitchell, one of the principal lawyers for Stop the Steal. I did a 4-hour interview with her. She dug herself such a hole witness, like you can start to try and get these people are like Boris Epstein. Boris Epstein. Boris Epstein is also another cooperating witness. If anyone wants to dig into that. Yeah, so it's an evolution sometimes about how you get to your subject matter, and a lot to do for me. Also, a lot of the films I made is to do with whether you get finance on it. So that it changes the speed you can work at. It changes the capacity that you can work at. Can you bring in other DPs? Can you bring in some assistant work? Can you bring in some research people? Like that's another super important factor. Nowadays, we live in an oligopoly where there's only 8 buyers, and if it's not celebrity and it's not true crime, then
I'm going to get back to that truth question because that's a really good point, and something I think we should explore. But I wanted to ask Carla, since you have editorial backgrounds, I mean, everyone on documentaries, as everyone who's a young person will learn, you do every single job. You shoot, you cut, you log, you're directing as well always. But when you think about the cutting room and you think about the story process and producing, like what's important for your process, and just in terms of like how do you sit down and start hatching a project that you can like live with and deal with, knowing that sometimes these projects can be 5 years or 6 years, or are there any secrets?
I mean, I think that at least for me, both. Just to give you a little bit of context, I've been editing for over 20 years, and mostly documentary features. I worked on RBG, I worked on Julia Child documentaries. I've done some narrative and quite a bit of archival footage. And, I got to a point in my career as an editor where, I was lucky enough to have a choice. I was able to choose a project towards the last maybe like 6 or 7 years. So for me, every project that I've been involved in, and including Frida, which was a project that I chose to make myself as a director, I think you have to be excited and I'm like a little girl in sugar. Like the subject matter is important to me, but I'm also really interested in how you can tell this story, because when those two things, come together, that's where magic can really happen. And even when you're talking about like a celebrity or true crime, aside from the issues of the industry right now, where it is really hard to get funding and financing for, social issues, documentaries, or for things that are outside of the celebrity realm. I find, some stories to be incredible conduits to like explore society and explore like bigger issues than just that person that you're telling the story about. But, for example, with Frida, what really excited me about her is to think about, most people know about Frida Kahlo, right? I don't have to, set her up. But I will set up the approach of the documentary. Hopefully you'll watch it after this. But we are telling the story of Frida Kahlo through her own voice. So the narrative is really her own words. And there's no expert interviews, there's nobody looking at her from the distance of time. We're really hearing from her and from the voices, from people that knew her and were witnesses of the moments in her life. But from the very beginning, the way I look at the story, why is Frida interesting, I think, is because you can see what happened with a woman when she decides not to contain her own voice. And that's incredibly relatable to, I think, a lot of experiences of women. And there's so many communities that obviously, feel like an ownership of her story and her art. And it was that, identifying that there was an opportunity for her to tell her own story that was the trigger of like excitement and the trigger of me being like a little girl on a lot of sugar for about 3 years of my life. It's like there's gonna be some kind of creative risk that is gonna feel really interesting, and it's gonna reach an intimacy that I find film can carry in the best possible way. I mean, I think that that's what I see the power of film, is that it can be so specific and so personal and so intimate that it can really connect to other people and bring other people into different universes or different contexts. So that's what excites me. It's like a combination of all those things. So, with celebrity films, I feel like there's some really bad ones, there's some really good ones, because if they become a window into bigger things, if they become a window into us like analyzing what the fuck is happening with our society, they become incredibly interesting. It's how you tell that story, right? So yeah, so that's where I come from.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you for that. Shirley, I know you're dealing with it on the project that we've been working on together, but like, how do you handle it when you know the people that you're interviewing are lying or not, or not telling you the truth? You know what I mean? Or like Nick said, like you're investigating, but you're a journalist, so they have free will to rewrite whatever incident they're discussing. Like, what is that? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, well, after I'm done crying, I've cried so much on this project. I'm sad. Yeah, I'm dealing with that a lot, where the nature of the project is super duper sensitive. So there's that. There's eating into it creatively. What we talked about.
Yeah, like what does it do to the story? Like how do you take that? Like that. Obviously, that's part of the story now, right? It's part of the story of everyone you're investigating. Like not getting the truth is part of the story. Right?
Yeah,
I guess you just use that, right?
Absolutely, especially if you never get to a truth, right? Or the truth, because there's a truth, there's the truth. So I like to play with it and lean into it creatively, and see how it can inspire the audience, because I believe the audience is so smart. If I'm picking up on it, the audience is gonna pick up on it. So the audience will begin to create their own perspective about who this person is. But I think like if you're having a hard time, keep trying. Ask other people, ask other subjects, increase your trust relationship with your current subjects. It might be something else there that you have to break through. Sometimes that stuff takes time, like what Nick was talking about. And if you find yourself not getting there, okay, well, how can you play? I wouldn't throw the story out, but like, how do you play with this creatively and allow it to inspire other things to shape and take form?
Yeah, I guess at some point you have to show the juxtaposition of people's views on the events, right?
Somebody else to rebut it. I've often used, if it's been like this, everyone has this version of the truth, like it's rational in many cases. So sometimes it's beneficial to take someone's statement that you pre-recorded, and if you know the other person thinks differently, play that for them and have them react to it, and then say, oh, is that what he thinks? Let me tell you what really happened. And then I've done this like 4 or 5 times, where you're just peeling back the layer of the onion, where you're getting to what you think is actually the core truth.
Yeah, Grace, have you had to deal with that in your projects, or?
Yeah, I'm actually looking at a project right now where the subjects are on opposite sides of a criminal case, and the reason they ended up in a criminal case is because they don't agree with each other.
Right,
Still don't.
obviously. Yeah.
And so they are constantly if not lying, giving a version of the truth that doesn't align with the other person's version of the truth. So that's what I find trickier when people are telling the truth. Like, it can be fact checked, it can be corroborated what they're saying, but it still doesn't align with the understanding of the other person. So I think that's where as a filmmaker you have to be careful about when you're creatively engaging with people who may not be being completely honest. We have to be careful about how we present things, because even if you're we all know facts can be interpreted in a lot of different ways. It's very present in our lives right now. That's true. So yeah, but doing the exercise of having them have that exchange through you on camera is a great way to solve that problem.
Or making the film all about it.
Yeah,
Or capturing 3 minutes.
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it is a creative opportunity as well, right?
Never trust a clown.
Yeah. Never trust a clown.
Because I think at the end of the day, the film and what the audience is craving, usually what I'm craving, is not a presentation of facts.
Right.
It's to understand the people on screen, the human beings on screen. And you're gonna get so much more information about a human being or how they interpret a fact or how they want to present a fact than what the fact is. So I think even though you're hearing two different things, or maybe in some cases just one thing presented a little bit suspiciously from my characters in this case, it's giving you so much more information about who they are than what they're saying.
That's right.
Did your parents ever tell you it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right?
That's right. No, what your face belies what is actually the real truth behind it, and we're programmed to respond to micro-facial gestures, whether you're nodding, looking at me, or looking at your, these little things, and this sort of, pathology of behavior is really interesting when they're telling the truth or not telling the truth. So you've got to play with that and the looks in editing to create an emotional response in the audience.
It's like Blade Runner, right? You're just giving them a series of questions, watching for the dilate, pre-fold, and then they're androids.
They look away.
Correct. Yeah.
Also, Pete, it also can allow an opportunity for your story to expand and take on new opportunities. So, like, thinking about the tactic that Nick just offered, and in my story, there's been times where I've fed some of the subjects facts or information, and then they're like, "Oh, that's not what happened," and they spew out a whole different story, and I'm like, "I've never heard this before." Now, this is another opportunity for us to explore something new. So, all that to say, when it happens, because it will, don't get scared, but really lean into it and play with it, because there's probably a lot of opportunity there for you.
Before we move on to like more of a technical thing, does anybody have any questions about any of that, like story? Are there any projects that you guys are working on or thinking about or stuck with, or that you want to throw out there? Someone's got to come up with one. There you go.
I have a question for you. So when you're talking about the project you're working on now that's taking so incredibly long, and that there's like a risk as to whether or not that person might actually reveal the truth of what they're not telling the family, only they know. When you're working on something that takes that long, and really tests your patience, like, are you working on other projects at the same time? And if so, are you like intentionally picking shorter projects that aren't going to take up so much of your time from the main, 5-year project?
Yeah, well, everybody's in different circumstances. There's some filmmakers who are fully funded and they're on a timeline and they can afford to dedicate, 40, 50, 60 hours a week to their project, from conception to final delivery. A Break in Belonging we did Kickstarter, we did self-funding, all that stuff. So I didn't have the pleasure of sitting around and thank God I didn't, because it's a heavy project. I emotionally would not have been able to bear the burden of doing this for 5 years. So yes, I was always doing something different. I'm very blessed and fortunate enough to work in branded content, So with branded content, sometimes I'm doing projects for 2 weeks, sometimes I'm doing it for 2 months. So there was always something else occupying my time. But on average, filmmakers are usually working on multiple projects at one time, especially with docs, because of the financing and your subjects. You're on their schedule, on their timeline. You're researching, you're investigating. So yeah, I was always doing multiple things, and still am. And I didn't know that this was happening. Me and Pete talked about this recently, but I took a year away from the project because it was so heavy. I didn't consciously understand what was happening, why I stepped back, but I needed it. I needed a rest. I needed to take a break in order to be inspired again, to get excited again, to have a new and fresh perspective to bring to the story, to see and hear different things that were available in storytelling, to give the subjects a break. So sometimes, everybody's in a different phase, and every project needs something different.
Yeah, follow up, there's someone on Zoom that said, when you put it on ice or you pause it, how do you just keep a cut of it and you just watch the cut again? Or what do any of you do to sort of say you have to step away from it for 3 months or 6 months? Is there anything special that you do that leave it off, or you just leave it where it is and just go pick it up?
I mean, I haven't had to do that as an editor or with Frida.
Yeah.
What I'll say is that I wish every film could take a month off before doing the final cut of the film.
Why is that?
Because I think that, there's a rush to finish and your head is so much in the story at the moment that I think that, what you gain with a little bit of distance and especially emotional distance to the project, you can come back to it and just see it with such fresh eyes that it opens up so many opportunities that or you can also let go of things that you couldn't before. So yeah, and a lot of us are working towards this really tight deadlines, and as an editor, I can never take vacation off during summer because the Santa's deadline is
right. You're
last
week of September.
Yeah. So yeah, if projects could afford 2 weeks off or a month off before that final 3 weeks of edit.
Yeah, it's a good topic. It's another question, and I see young filmmakers doing this all the time. A lot of the people that work here at Goldcrest all have a project. Hopefully everyone's got a project. Go ahead. You have a question?
Yeah, I have a related
Go ahead.
question to Ryan, which is regarding sound as well, and how that should be factored in. Because I was co-editor in a film before, and I had the chance to work in sound, and it was fascinating. And I feel like it really, it was really a part of the project. So I would ask you, how that be factored in, ideally, and what's the reality of it a little bit in terms, especially in the dark world.
I mean, there's always limitations on budget and turn time usually with documentaries. When we were speaking about this before, I think people look at sound for docs as we have what we have and that's it, and we just need it better. And there's a real opportunity to take some time and sweeten stuff and build stuff out. And you think Foley, why do I need Foley for a doc? And it's it can really bring texture and support to the story and characters, and it's so allowing time for sound design versus just sound mix is great when we get it.
Yeah, as a sound professional, right? You're working on tons of projects all the time. Would it benefit getting involved in projects earlier? As opposed to just oh hey, Pete booked a sound job at Goldcrest and you've got a week to prep it and mix it. And Don already wants to build and pay for it before you get in. No, I'm just kidding.
No, but yeah.
Oh, sorry, he's still here.
Any project I can get involved, any project creatively I can get involved with sooner the better. Just watching a rough cut, because I feel like people wait sometimes to lock.
Yeah.
And that can be from initial discussion to lock years.
Yeah.
And just knowing the material, because I'm learning as well. So if I have 3 weeks or whatever to edit, to sound design a film, and a director's been spending years on that, I have to get up to speed really quick.
Right.
And try to very quickly tease out what the threads are, what the big points are. So the sooner I can do that, the better.
Yeah.
I have a question, Laura. So, like for filmmakers, one of the biggest challenges that we all have is financing, right? And I see a lot of folks are like, I feel like audio becomes like a second thought in when you're in pre-pro, or it's not even in development for what I've seen. Like what are things that folks should be considering when in development or in production, when you're or create a better sound product?
Yeah, the nature of documentaries are that you can when you can, but you know, having proper lights on people, being turning, you know, like when the air conditioning
Mixing tracks.
but just like, or like understanding that if you're gonna do this interview in the scene and the air conditioner's on or the water pipes broken in the background, that we're gonna have to deal with that one way or another later, and there are ways to treat it, but you know, it's not always gonna be perfect. I've had scenarios where they're like, what could we have done better? It's like, well, don't hide the microphone under the jacket, you know, it's a doc, like let it be where it is. Because it is a doc, you don't have to be as.
Yeah, it's an interview.
It's an interview.
The text of the grammar of the film is that, you know, someone's sitting down and there's a camera there's a couple of guys and so
Yeah, there's no pretense,
Yeah, unfortunately, people don't think about sound at all.
No.
Yeah,
Another big thing that's in terms of budget and being efficient, it's like always roll sound for B-roll, like,
Yes.
you know, capture as much. The more we have in the final, the less I have to try to, you know, if you have a shot of New York City and you're like, oh, it's just B-roll, we don't need any sound in there. I have to then build that all out.
yeah,
And so now I'm just cutting carbides and honks and like airs when I could be really like helping build transitions or laying tones or working with the composer. But you know, like if we have X amount of time, there's a certain amount of technical work that has to be done. So alleviating as much of that technical work is great.
yeah.
And if you only have one mic and it's the camera mic and it's a very variable sound scenario, then split the tracks and have one hotter than the other. Because then you've got a chance of catching, you've got a larger range. Or use these new mics that have the 32-bit, which the floating point is they're really quite good now.
I would just add, I mean, you have to think about sound as a creative element. I always think about storytelling as, I don't know why I always thought about it as a dance. When you're putting the story together, it's this like dance between visuals and audio. Audio is as important, and you know, same as just like thinking about it on the field, like get it, record it. Don't talk when you're having a beauty shot. So like, shut up, you know, because then you'll have even if your editor is thinking about sound, you'll have us, you know, trying to find like clean audio sound for visuals and put it in there. But also it has so much to do with the flow of timing for your film. You know, I feel like if you know where you want to say thematically, the form, how you play with the video, how you play with the audio, really has to support that, right? It really has to support the heart of your film. And audio has so much to do with it, because I think an editor described it like audio is like water, and video is like you put a sweater, like a wool sweater, into water, and the timing of the video compresses when you add a lot of audio. The layering of the audio as you're discovering your story gives it so much texture. Even to think about audio in creative ways, that it's just not what you see is what you hear, but like how do you get into the mind of somebody? How can you create like a sense of horror or a sense of void in somebody's heart? Like the audio can do so much for you. So like even having, if you don't have the budget, even just having one conversation, you know, you'll get to you know, the film will get to you at some point, but having those creative conversations really early on are really useful, because some artists are like.
So also, the sound is you can or it helps emphasize what's going on in the scene sometimes. Like if we made a film with Shrepo on the front lines in Afghanistan, like it's the footage is kinetic and jumpy. But the sound, if the soundscape is kinetic and jumpy, then you lose that atmosphere that you're creating, and you just throw people out. So you've got to, you know, sound is so important, and high level sound, to create this atmosphere that doesn't that doesn't jump around, like, and becomes consistent and emphasizes what you're trying to do.
Someone's shooting tomorrow and they want to know what mic to use.
What situation?
What's
an interview? Sennheiser 416 and some Sennheiser.
What's the 32-bit?
32-bit floating point.
Turn on the AC.
Well,
And the refrigerator.
It allows it on.
Fine.
Or remember to turn off the fridge.
And your cell phones.
So let's talk about a topic, and I think this sort of is leaning into it, getting sound involved earlier. It's something I talk to young filmmakers a lot about, and I want to get your opinion on it. You know, when I work with more experienced filmmakers, I watch them their projects are in. They're constantly bringing in. I watched Darren Aronofsky watch the worst cuts of some of his movies with some of the most.
And then he delivered it.
And then he said it was done with some really. Maybe he should have worked longer. It's a bad example. Sorry, Darren. But how? How often should people screen? How often do you screen? Like who do you invite? Just invite anybody? Like
I can answer that.
Yeah.
So I mean, you're screaming to yourself all the time, but I think at least with your team, watching things as as dirty as they are is really helpful, because really putting a documentary together is the conversations that you have about story. It's not necessarily getting your opinion out. It's really about those conversations where what are you can build in the voice of the character. And those conversations are happening in your, very, even your first attempts, getting some reactions even early on. You just need to prepare yourself as a filmmaker for rough cut. People might give you prescriptive solutions for the reactions that they're having. Maybe you don't wanna, you just have to just hear what's behind of the note and hear, just to get a sense like why are people having such a bad reaction? Yeah, it's always helpful to hear people's reactions and how they are understanding the theme that you try to put together.
But it's the conversations afterwards, because you can sit at a keyboard and screen for yourself, and you can make diligent notes on your line pad, and you tick, remember the little square box, and you tick it and tick it, you do all those things. But you're just that's like a tactical solution. Conversations provide strategic analysis of what you're doing. It's a much bigger, generally bigger conversation. Like, you could cut out there a little bit earlier. So you're able to see the wood for the trees more. And feeling, sometimes it's not even that, like I'm screaming myself, and when the audience is restless, okay, time to, and it might not be the problem with that film at that point. It might have been 10 minutes earlier that is resulting in them being restless. We're making a film. But we still have watching films together as a community, even though the Apple Vision Goggle is so good. Being a community, right? And react.
To your point about it being a conversation, I think, like you were saying, a note might have a prescription in it, and you don't always have to listen to a prescription.
Sure.
It's a good idea to listen to the fact that someone had a reaction to a moment.
Mm-hmm.
And even whether there is a prescription or not, and whether you agree with it or not, it's worth having a conversation about it. All right, so you had a feeling, you think that the thing we should do about that feeling is this, but I really want to understand why.
Right.
Like, why did you have that feeling? Because it might even be something that's good. Often when people are giving notes, they're like, I'm confused here. You're like, maybe you should feel confused. Maybe that's right now.
Yeah.
So
I'm angry.
Yeah, or I'm uncomfortable, or maybe I'm feeling restless. Those negative emotions. So
that's a good point for the audience or for anybody. Like if you at screen try to be like, oh, if you cut this a little shorter, it would be good. Don't tell them what to do, or you can. But I'm saying, I feel like they would get more out of it.
agree with that. Over
Yeah.
telling you what to do. Tell me how you feel.
Let's go.
You know, I do wanna add that, I mean, you know, coming from editors and documentaries are, you know, really collaborating with the writing of this
Right.
story.
You're writing the film in the editing.
Yeah,
right.
Right. But it's a very, you know, delicate, really intense, beautiful collaboration with the directors. Going from editing into the directing chair, even though I never left the editing chair, but I quickly realized that the best decisions that you can make as a director is, you know, the people that you want to collaborate with. And I really want to emphasize the word collaboration, because as a director, I realized that I did have a vision, but it was in collaboration that vision came to
Absolutely, that's absolutely the truth. Like, it's an auteur to a point, but like you're the driving force. But like, you want to work with the best people you can emotionally connect with, and because that's what brings passion back to you, and you're sharing and you're going as a team.
Yeah.
Because you have to do it as a team sport. And the things you can do alone is
What do you think about when you're picking your team members and collaborators?
Well, I mean, because I was, and she was like not only a logistical producer, also, you know, she really handled a lot of the research, and so she came to support the creative. But then I was just like, I need a supervising editor sessions about the story, like constantly, and collaborate in building the narrative. And yeah, and so there were 3 people I really wanted to work with, and I convinced like somebody, and David T came on board, and he's just like an incredible story guy.
Yes.
So yeah, and same with the music. You know, I mean, it's interesting. Like, we experimented with music in my film pretty early on, but we experimented with a couple of cues. Once we kind of found a path, then the rest of the film came together in composition quickly. It's kind of like similar to, like, you know, getting involved in a creative conversation with a sound artist, right? You can talk about like some of the creative ideas, and they can propose things to you. So it is a collaboration. It's like the talent.
And as somebody who's gets hired on one of those teams, like feeling like a collaborator versus like an operator, where it's just like,
Yeah.
you know, up, down, left, right. Like, if I'm a collaborator and I have something at stake, I'm much more likely to want to stay a little later to work on, you know, think about the project on the weekend. Like, it's just like feeling like I've got some artistic freedom really means a lot.
So Sean, will you go to screenings for free for the audience? You're on camera. Yeah. Oh, yes, see? He said yes.
I want to add something to how you select a team. So my story is very, very personal. So it was important for me to I knew if I had collaborators on the team who could relate to this story, so my team is all Black folks. They all have been impacted by incarceration. All of them got daddy issues. Like, when I say the residents deep,
connection.
but I mean, like, we rented a house out in Georgia, and for a week we screened and we talked. It was about 20% screening, 80 conversations, and magic was made. I was able to hear things from Black men that I would never, ever been able to even imagine, because that's not my experience. But me having people at collaborators in this room where they deeply resonated with this story, and they could relate to these characters in ways that I can't, even as a Black woman. It took the story from like a 6 to a 9 in a week. But it was the intentionality of bringing collaborators onto the project who could relate and who had a personal connection to this topic.
That's great. Thank you, guys. So this is a question. We're in New York, okay? We want to watch documentaries. Like, where do we go to watch them? Where can we still watch them in theaters? What are some of the favorite things that you have all watched lately, you know, between Doc Fest down the street or whatever? Anybody can just sort of take it and recommend something for people to go see or where to go.
Yeah. Well, we have Tribeca coming up, right? You could watch tons of stuff there.
Where do you watch the stuff at Tribeca? Go to the festival?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you can go on their website, you can
Mhm.
buy passes for things that interest you. Even schools, where you can support like an SVA where their students are making stories all the time and see, and that's really important too. You can get access to new upcoming creators and filmmakers and see how they're thinking and what's important to them and the stories that they're telling. IFC, there's local, everybody, especially in Brooklyn, there's tons of like local theaters where people are always showcasing work. It's all around us.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I would say IFC will show, a lot of great documentaries. They have really great programming. I don't know if they rent. I think that they like the big companies or streamers do a small like theatrical runs to be able to like get into awards. So you'll find good documentaries there. Doc-NYC.
Yeah.
They don't only like show films in November, but they have a spring series, a
Yeah.
summer series. So if you follow them, you can watch some really good programming there.
What's the documentary everyone should watch if they haven't seen it, in your guys' estimations? Besides Rita.
Rita.
Yeah. Anything jump out at you that you would tell a young filmmaker or starting filmmaker to watch to start thinking about?
I'd go back through the Oscar-winning films of, the heyday of documentaries for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Just there's phases, right? I used to like documentaries made on film, like Marjo is one of my favorite films ever.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, you've got to poke around, there's lots of sources.
Yeah.
I think there's been different phases for documentaries. There's
Yeah.
the phases where documentary were made like, as pure art, where they weren't expecting to make money, and like it was like people were,
Mm-hmm.
selling their shoes to buy film and mag stock to make their film. Like
Right.
shot on film, cut on film. That's a real effort when you start to see what the process is to make
Sure.
a 90-minute film.
Absolutely.
A film.
I think that's a good idea. I would take a look at not only the nominated films for the Oscars for maybe the past 20 years, but actually the shortlisted films. I think those lists, there are like 15 films each year
Yeah.
that get shortlisted. And I would also take a look at the shorts
Yeah.
that get shortlisted as well. There's a lot of great short filmmaking.
Yeah.
That's a little bit harder to get access to.
Any other final questions? You get an award. You could get hired if you ask the right question. Warren? Oh, nice.
I guess in terms of, this is back to the collaboration, but when you have a disagreement with someone, like anything is going to be
Robert
with
Hayes'
people,
sisters.
but but exactly, like when you do that, or you try to make your compromises, but you're still not finding an agreement, how in the past have you figured out these situations where you can't come to a place with somebody you really trust?
I would say, sorry, I'm jumping in. Okay. I would say I would not call it disagreement with my creative team. It's just a conversation where, and I think that it's not so specific, like cut 8 frames. I mean, somebody can tell you like this needs a little more energy here or whatever. But it's just kind of like a conversation. I mean, I've been told that I have like my thinking phase when I'm taking in notes is a defiant phase. Like people think that that I'm thinking like, why am I carrying this stupid notes? But I'm not. I'm just processing. But because you have to give yourself some time to process when somebody's giving you something that you haven't thought about, But that can be the initial conversation into something else. Now, when you get specific notes from the buyer, that's
That's the real fight.
That could be nonsense, like.
Or it can be very
Usually it is.
specific, like this shot or this other shot,
17 minutes, Netflix says inciting incident has to
Yeah.
happen. Like, you get notes like that, like.
yeah, or like you have to have an eye contact, I think you know, with that. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think in both cases, probably with your collaborators more successfully than with the computer, exactly. Well, that's wrong. But still, the answer I think for me is the same, that if you have, focus on the word collaboration, but yes, you can only put one thing on the screen, one version on the screen. I would say audition both, always. You don't know until you see it sometimes. And then also sort of like step back and not say this or that, but like, what are we trying to accomplish? Like, what is the point of this scene? What is the point of, like, what question are we actually trying to answer? If we have two answers, maybe let's look back at the question and see if it's even the right question. Maybe we can change the question and then it's much clearer what our answer should be.
I've made a lot of films with my partner Sebastian Juncker, and he has an interesting way of saying it. The audience never misses what they haven't seen.
Yeah.
So, let's just think of it.
Yeah.
That's comforting, yeah.
Also, on the extreme of this, we have built in contracts when there is huge disputes, who has the final say creatively? So that's something to consider. Ray Dalio has a great philosophy around artful debate. That's something that you can consider. But if you are truly in partnership and full and helpful collaborator, you want to be challenged and you want people to bring a strong perspective and different ideas to the table and just have fun with it.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, panel. You guys are really incredible. Inspiring, and feel free to stay, hang out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. See you next time.